this recording we'll discuss an introduction to the integumentary system. Your skin, or your integumentary system, accounts for between 10 and 15% of your total body weight. That makes it the largest organ in your entire body. And think about that for a minute. 10% up to 15% of your total body weight. Okay? So that's pretty significant for one organ. Your skin, specifically, is also known as your cutaneous membrane, and it's composed of both your epidermis and your dermis. Your hypodermis, that you may be familiar with, is not technically part of your skin, but a lot of times it gets thrown around in a skin discussion for good measure. Your epidermis is the more superficial of these two layers. This is composed of keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelial tissue that rests on a basement membrane. And then your dermis, which would sit deep to the epidermis in that basement membrane. This is loose connective tissue and dense irregular connective tissue as well. So just a quick cartoon image of the skin itself. We've got both the epidermis and the dermis, also that hypodermis, which is not technically part of the skin. Both the epidermis and the dermis, the hypodermis, this is your cutaneous membrane that we've mentioned in our discussion of membranes themselves. You can see that not only do we have just the keratinized squamous epithelial tissue to discuss, we've got all of these accessory organs as well. We'll get into sebaceous glands, sweat glands, blood vessels, even sensory receptors. We've got lots to discuss with the skin chapter. Those accessory structures I just mentioned include sweat glands, sebaceous glands. Even your hair and your nails are technically accessory structures of your skin. A lot of times it would be easy to overlook those when we talked about just the skin in general, but they count as well. You also have sensory receptors. You know this because you know that you can feel when things touch your skin or not. And then your little erector pili muscles. These are little bands of smooth muscle that are associated with the hairs on the surface of your skin. Now the epidermis specifically is avascular. It does not have direct blood supply, which means it must rely on diffusion for oxygen and nutrients from the vessels that live in the dermis. This limits the thickness of your epidermal layer, or at the very least it limits the thickness of living cells of your epidermis, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. But this does lend itself to that the superficial layers they're all dead. All those cells, the ones that fall off every time we wash our hands and things like that, they were all dead anyway. All right, that hypodermis, we're almost done talking about it. This is sometimes referred to as your superficial fascia, which is kind of a fun word to say, or just your subcutaneous fat, whatever you prefer. Although it's not part of the skin, it does help anchor the skin onto the muscles and the bones. In addition to the adipose tissue, you've got some loose connective tissue. It itself has a very abundant blood supply, so it is well nourished itself, and you can see that those blood vessels are going to branch off, and that's where the vessels of the dermis originate from also. Now, your integumentary system has quite a few functions, and some of these are very obvious to you, and some of these may be new, or maybe you've forgotten about them. So overall, your integumentary system is good at protection from both mechanical traumas, pathogens, the environment, things like that. The stratified squamous keratinized epithelial tissue provides a durable but flexible surface, so you know that you do have a little bit of wiggle room in your skin, if you will, because we do move around. It protects your body from mechanical trauma directly. It also acts as a continuous barrier to microorganisms or other pathogens that could be trying to invade our bodies. And as long as your skin is nice and intact and we don't have any open wounds, your body does a pretty good job of preventing infection this way. We can also destroy pathogens on the surface of our skin as well through the sweat and the oil that we secrete, which is where the glands come in. They're the ones that are going to secrete all those antimicrobial substances. And then we can protect from the environment, most notably the sun, the UV light that penetrates our skin every time we go out in the sun, even if it's a cloudy day. That can damage the deeper tissues. And so the nice keratinized layer of our skin helps reduce the damage caused by the sun. And then the skin secretes hydrophobic lipid-based chemicals that that help maintain water and electrolyte homeostasis. So even though we can regulate body temperature, for example, through sweat, we don't want to lose too much water and too many electrolytes that way. And these other substances kind of help make sure that we're balancing that. Let's talk about what happens when you get hot. Okay. So if we remember way back to feedback loops, we have a couple of steps to a feedback loop. First is a sensory receptor. So you have thermoreceptors that are going in your skin that are going to detect that increase in temperature. So say it's the middle of July in the south and it's 100 degrees outside. Okay. Eventually, your whole body is going to get a little toasty. Your sensory receptors, your thermoreceptors, they're going to notice that. They are going to send information through a sensory neuron. They're going to send that to your brain, specifically your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is basically like the thermostat for your body. You have a thermoregulatory center within your hypothalamus. And your control center here is going to send signals to your effector, and we're going to have to do something about this problem of heating up. So who are we going to call? We are going to call on the sweat glands themselves, and we're going to sweat. Now the sweat itself, it serves a purpose. It takes some of that heat out of the body itself, but you really don't start to cool off until the sweat evaporates. That takes the heat off of your body when the sweat evaporates itself. And so that's kind of why humidity is so bad. It makes it harder for that sweat to evaporate and therefore remove all of the heat itself. And so that's why it feels really good to stand in front of a fan after you've been sweating. Not only are we going to activate the sweat glands, but one of the things that doesn't get mentioned when we introduce the idea of negative feedback is your blood vessels also play a role in this. Okay, so when we first introduce you to negative feedback, we almost always talk about body temperature because everybody has sweated and everybody shivers when they get cold, but there are other parts of your body that play a role in regulating your body temperature that usually get left out in that introductory discussion. And here is a prime example. So everybody knows that you sweat when you get hot, but did you know that your blood vessels also dilate? Okay, specifically the ones in your dermis. This is also triggered by your hypothalamus. When you dilate your vessels, you increase the blood flow to those vessels, and that allows for more heat to radiate away from your body. Okay, and that heat will hopefully end up in the sweat that will hopefully evaporate, and all of that will work together to cool you down. Okay, so that's what happens when you get hot. And we've got our little picture. So you get hot, your skin, your good old hypothalamus, and then you've got your sweat glands and your blood vessels. Now, what happens when you get chilly? So what happens if we get cold? You have different thermoreceptors that notice that you've gotten a little chilly. So now it's maybe January up north where it's really cold and it snows a lot. They detect that drop in body temperature. They are going to also send signals to your hypothalamus. Okay, so it's still your thermostat. But what are we going to do about it now? It probably would not be a good idea to stimulate our sweat glands here. Instead, we are going to send a signal to your blood vessels to vasoconstrict. This is going to reduce the amount of blood flow, which limits how much heat we're going to lose through our skin. It also helps us redirect blood flow to your deeper tissues and your organs, which help us conserve heat, and it helps make sure that adequate blood supply is getting to your main organs like your heart and things like that, so we can keep those things going while you're chilly. And last but not least, we do also send signals to your skeletal muscles, and so you can shiver, which also creates heat. But again, this is another example of, our introductory discussion to negative feedback probably only mentioned skeletal muscles shivering to heat you up, but your blood vessels play a role in this as well. Okay. And we've got our new picture. If we got chilly, our receptors tell our hypothalamus, and now our blood vessels are going to vasoconstrict. And then we do have a second effector over here. This would be our skeletal muscles that would shiver and warm us up as well. Now, we have covered, let's go back real quick. We've done protection, sensation, thermoregulation. We went through our examples. We have more functions of the skin. We've got excretion. We can get rid of waste products and toxins, okay, through your skin. This occurs, most of this occurs at other organs, specifically, for example, your kidneys. Your kidneys are very good at eliminating waste products, but your skin contributes a little bit here. It also plays a crucial role in the synthesis of vitamin D. Okay, so you have cells that live deep down in your epidermis, and they convert an inactive form, or sometimes we'll call it a precursor form of vitamin D. They'll start to convert that into an active form. We just kind of start that process. So that precursor, we convert it into something called cholecalciferol, which is kind of hard to say. This only happens when you are exposed to UV radiation of the sun. That cholecalciferol then makes its way into the blood. It will be modified by your liver and then your kidneys, where it is finally turned into calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D. So you probably didn't really know that creating legitimate functional vitamin D was such a complex process, but now you know. We start in your skin, okay, we make that cholecalciferol, your liver modifies it, and then finally your kidneys create active vitamin D. Now, why do we really care about vitamin D? You don't really hear a lot about vitamin D, which is unfortunate, unless you're talking about, a lot of times you'll hear about vitamin D when we talk about milk, or like a young child not getting enough milk, and so their bones will be weak. Well, what does vitamin D have to do with all that? Calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D, is required for calcium ion absorption from your small intestines. Now, what does that mean? That means if you don't have enough vitamin D, you are not absorbing enough calcium through your small intestine. Well, besides the fact that you need calcium to build strong bones, which is what we always hear about, calcium also plays a critical role in your nerve function, muscle contraction, as well as building those strong bones that we always hear about. And so here's kind of the funny thing, is you can drink a gallon of milk a day, and if you never go outside to expose yourself to those UV rays, if you don't take your supplements, if you are still deficient in vitamin D, then you could still suffer from a deficiency of calcium because your body's not absorbing it properly. Okay, so you've got to have your vitamin D as well.